Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman. Paris Schutz has the evening off. On the show tonight,
Illinois, the state of our great state is strong.
The governor says he's restored Illinois' finances heading into a re-election battle. His challengers say it's a gimmick. Still shoveling your way out of the snow? Sorry to say there is more in the forecast for tomorrow.
I've decided that I'm not going to run for re-election as president of the CTU.
The Chicago Teachers Union will have a new leader now that Jesse Sharkey announces he's moving on.
It sounds to me a lot more like a routine practice.
Why Rod Blagojevich was paid to weigh in on a congressional race in Spotlight Politics. Frigid temperatures and heavy snowfall have left Chicago's homeless population vulnerable. Outreach workers share what's happening on the ground.
It's not a party, you know? It's not a party if you don't have a pinata.
And a Rogers Park shop owner whose custom craft pinatas are a smashing success with her customers. But first, some of today's top stories. A massive winter storm blanketed Illinois with snow overnight and through much of the day, and there's more on the way. The blizzard forced widespread road closures, especially south of Chicago, with shutdowns on parts of Interstates 80, 55, and 74. In the Chicago area, snowfall varied widely, with parts of the south side and south suburbs seeing around 10 inches, while O'Hare Airport saw about 5 inches as of noon. The snow tapered off this afternoon, but the National Weather Service predicts it'll start falling again between about 2 a.m. and 1 p.m. The storm forced lawmakers in Springfield to cancel the session days they'd planned for this week, but Governor J.B. Pritzker's annual budget address went ahead as scheduled. Pritzker spoke in the smaller Old State Capitol rather than in the large House chamber as usual. Just a few dozen people were in the room for Pritzker's speech, including Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton and House Minority Leader Jim Durkin. We'll have much more on Pritzker's speech in just a bit. Chicago Teachers Union President Jesse Sharkey is stepping down later this year. Sharkey announced today he won't run for re-election and says he plans to return to teaching after his current term ends on June 30th.
That I see myself as a member of a movement, an education justice movement, and the goal of that movement is not to get into positions of administrative power and influence and then hang on to them for as long as possible. I'm very confident that we have leadership in the CTU that's capable of not only taking over the union, but taking it to new heights and new levels.
Sharkey was appointed president of the CTU in 2018 when the union's former leader, Karen Lewis, retired. He was later elected to the post. He previously served as CTU vice president. And we'll have more on this coming up later in the program. Up next, Amanda Vinicky is live from the state capitol with analysis of the governor's budget address. Stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Proposing a spending plan can be one of a governor's toughest jobs. But with the higher than expected revenues coming in, coupled with federal dollars easing the financial strain, Governor J.B. Pritzker is using it as an opportunity as he heads into a re-election battle. Amanda Vinicky joins us now from Springfield with a rundown. Amanda.
Yeah, Brandis, as you noted, this was an atypical speech, and not just because it wasn't held in this building like it usually is. Rather, it was at the Old State Capitol, where actually President Abraham Lincoln served when he was an Illinois lawmaker. Today, only a handful of legislators in the audience, but no matter. As Pritzker himself said, this is one of the biggest forums, most public forums a governor can have, and, well, Pritzker took full advantage of it.
When I was first elected, I pledged to budget responsibly and with a focus on reducing burdens on working families. I'm proud to say this proposed fiscal year 2023 budget plan does just that.
This is a plan that spends 45-point-something billion dollars, and still, the governor says, is going to leave Illinois with something we don't often have, a surplus of $1.7 billion. That, even as it does give modest increases to education, to violence prevention programs, including a new one that will serve as gang witness protection, and then also not only pays the state's legally required contribution to the underfunded pension programs, that's a contribution of $9.6 billion, but then adds another $500 million to that.
Responsible fiscal management is yielding substantial savings, unburdening our state from the anchor that has weighed us down for far too long.
I'm not sure that pensions are really going to perk the interest of many people other than perhaps credit ratings analysts, government insiders, and, well, those who are waiting to get that retirement benefit. But here is something that I bet will perk up the ears of Illinois residents, aka voters, and that is that Pritzker plans to give a series of one-time tax breaks. That includes healthcare workers not having to pay licensing fees for this fiscal year, keeping flat the tax on gasoline when it is supposed to go up by 2 cents a gallon, and removing a 1% tax on groceries. Again, that would just be for 1 year, saving families, well, about $1 per $100 that they spend on food. These moves are earning praise from Pritzker's fellow Democrats, but Republicans, including those who are running for governor, call these gimmicks that are tailor-made for Pritzker's re-election campaign. We had one of those candidates, and that is downstate entrepreneur Jesse Sullivan, saying that Pritzker is, quote, attempting to bribe voters with fake tax relief. You do also have some powerful interests, including some of those that typically get along with the governor pushing back. Those gas tax dollars, that is, are supposed to pay for road repairs, and that means that road repairs will be shorted through this tax relief by $135 million. The local operating engineers 150 union says that that is not responsible. Only a week ago, we saw a bridge collapse in Pennsylvania, and there are currently more than 2,000 structurally deficient bridges in Illinois, the union said in a statement. Our state is only beginning to make progress on this, and now is not the time to start writing IOUs for our critical infrastructure. The head of the Illinois Chamber of Commerce shares that concern as well as others. President Todd Meisch says that these small bits of tax relief are not going to materially help people.
Chicken feed being sprinkled around to different areas. I don't think the grocery tax relief is going to be that meaningful. It's a good impetus, but it's not going to be that meaningful, and even less so on the gas tax. When it's 2 cents on $3.40 a gallon, what difference does that make? Let's go ahead and put that all into property tax relief and sustain vital investment in our transportation infrastructure.
Now, Meisch is alluding there to another one-time offer of tax relief. Some 2 million households would be eligible for a maximum property tax refund of $300. But Meisch points out that that leaves out those who rent. Also, it leaves out businesses, including local businesses that are members of the chamber. He says that Pritzker should include businesses in this property tax relief plan and then also offer property tax savings that will last for after the governor's race is over. Now, how much room is there for negotiation in all of this? Well, it is early in the budget negotiations process. Here's Pritzker.
What a self-indulgent position the cynics take, always opposing what's in the best interests of the people of Illinois if they think it will advance their political standing. It's a curious position, but then again, there have long been people in Illinois state politics who have cared more about promoting their own propaganda than they do about what's best for your pocketbooks. During this budget cycle, especially, seats at the grown-up table will be off limits to those who aren't working in the public's best interests.
Republicans say that that does not sound to them like an invitation to compromise. They are particularly keen on negotiating an anti-violence package. There's a whole lot more in this, but for now, Brandis, sending it back to you.
Amanda, thank you. And of course, we'll see you in a bit to talk more about this during our Spotlight Politics. And as we just heard, Governor Pritzker's budget proposal is packed with goodies appealing to some voters ahead of the November election. Pritzker's plan would provide roughly $1 billion in relief for pandemic-hit households by giving a one-time property tax rebate and freezing taxes on groceries and gas. Pritzker insists the state can afford it.
As we move on to tackle the questions of what vital current priorities our government should fund, know that we start from a place where our bills are paid. Our most pressing short-term debts are nearly gone. and our most critical long-term financial liabilities are in the best fiscal shape they have been in since the turn of the century.
Joining us now with their reactions are Illinois House Majority Leader Greg Harris, a Democrat from Chicago, State Representative Tom Demmer, a Republican from Dixon, State Senator Don DeWitt, a Republican from West Dundee, and State Senator L.G. Sims, a Democrat from Chicago. Gentlemen, thanks for being available for us this evening. Representative Demmer, let's start with you, please. What is your initial reaction to Governor Pritzker's proposed budget?
Well, I think the first thing that we have to focus on is, this is a very different budget message than we've heard from the governor in previous years. And I think rightfully calls a little bit of skepticism into believing the first blush impression of it. Just a year and a half ago, Governor Pritzker was out telling voters across Illinois that they needed to approve his $3 billion tax increase. Otherwise, there would be drastic cuts or tax increases across the board. Then he followed it up last year with a proposal to increase taxes on businesses by over $1 billion that was rejected by the General Assembly. But this year, with re-election looming, Governor Pritzker wants to paint a very rosy picture. But given the track record, I think it's right for people across Illinois to call into question whether he has a lot of credibility in these budget messages.
So, Senator DeWitt, what do you make of the various one-time tax relief provisions? A property tax rebate, freeze on grocery taxes, a freeze on gas taxes, and waiving liquor license fees for bars and restaurants. Could Republicans back them even if they're not the permanent tax relief measures you'd like to see?
I think that's possible, Brandis. I think these one-time gestures of tax cuts, what I would say to the governor is welcome to the table. We have been suggesting all along that taxes against residents of this state continue to grow year after year. Look, there's some very good things in this budget that we want to work with the administration and with our colleagues across the aisle on. I think the fact that, for example, that the governor is making actuarial payments to the pension fund is a great head start to try to start the process of curing the pension crisis that is the albatross around the neck of our state. We hope the governor and our colleagues will include us in those conversations this year. Unlike past years where we've been shut out, they thumb their nose at 4 to 6 million people in the state of Illinois when they do that. We hope he's sincere when he says he'll be inviting us to the table to discuss these issues.
Representative Harris, how do you address some of the criticism, that comes from some Republicans as well as the Illinois Chamber of Commerce that these tax relief proposals are one-time gimmicks to help the governor get reelected?
I think what we're trying to do is address the pressures people are feeling right now at home. And putting $1 billion in tax relief directly into people's pockets by cutting the gas tax, by taking the sales tax off food, and by giving property tax relief to every homeowner, I think are very good starts. And there's so much the budget does in addition to that helps our families. We're increasing child care. We're greatly increasing access to mental health and substance abuse treatment across the state. So many people are suffering during COVID, and we want to bring these resources to the community. We're putting another $350 million into our public schools. We're putting money into a rainy day fund, just about $1 billion into a rainy day fund to protect the state against future downturns. As it was said, we're paying more than our required pension payments. We've paid back our debts. We've had the first credit rating upgrades in 20 years. Things are looking very good. It was wonderful to hear a governor come forward today and talk about how we're going to make the state better, as opposed to doom and gloom and the fights that we were used to under the previous governor.
Senator Sims, Governor Pritzker says it's time for every local taxing district to take a long, hard look at reducing the burden of high property taxes. Would Democrats support permanently cutting property taxes? And if so, how would that revenue be replaced?
Well, Brandis, as I think you've heard from all of us, this is early on in the process. And what we want to make sure that what we're doing is having those discussions about what our budget looks like as we move forward through the session. That's why I was so pleased to see the governor come out in his budget proposal and talk about $1 billion in tax relief. We have been talking about as Senate Democrats for a long time, how we invest in working families, how we make sure that those people who are struggling, particularly during the pandemic, have the resources they need to be successful. We've talked about that over and over again, and we'll continue to do that. But this budget proposal, it starts that discussion. It starts that process for having the discussion about investing in those areas where we can have the discussion about what the overall process looks like and what those overall proposals look like. This is very early in the process, but we'll have those discussions. And I'm glad to hear my colleagues say they want to be part of those discussions, because unfortunately, in years past, that has not been the case. It's not been the case where they've come to the table and had those discussions, but we would welcome them to participate and have those discussions with us.
So Representative Demmer Governor Pritzker says the state is in its best fiscal position that it's been in decades, and that the credit agencies seem to agree. How much credit does the governor deserve for turning the state's finances around?
Well, I think we have to acknowledge the fact that the past couple of budget years have been heavily influenced by an avalanche of cash from the federal government. We know through a number of different bills, the CARES Act first, the American Recovery Plan Act, the subsidies to unemployment, the stimulus checks, all kinds of things have injected an unprecedented amount of money into the Illinois economy. Also, we've received over $2 billion extra in reimbursement for the state's Medicaid program. That's just folded into the rest of the budget. So we need to be cautious about building a new budget based on the last year or two's experience, because the reality is that those budgets were largely balanced based on borrowing and influxes of cash from the federal government.
Representative Harris, same question to you. Is the state's financial turnaround primarily a result of this influx of federal cash? How much credit does the governor get?
The governor gets a lot of credit. I mean, we have to deal with the hand that we're dealt. We had to deal the last couple of years with the effects of COVID that devastated swaths of our economy, that overtaxed our healthcare system, that disrupted people's family and work lives. And yes, the federal government gave all the states some resources to help deal with that. And I think the governor should get a lot of credit for making sure that those funds went directly to child care, to rental assistance, to supporting our hospitals and our FQHCs. It was put in the form of one-time expenditures so we don't fall off the fiscal cliff that some folks worry about. So I think it's been prudently managed. I think it's been well managed. But at the same time, we have also turned a surplus in our operations, and the governor is taking that surplus and investing it in paying down our debt and securing our fiscal stability and reducing our structural deficits on into the future.
So crime and public safety, of course, unfortunately, often an issue in Chicago and other cities in Illinois. Governor Pritzker proposes to spend over $800 million on violence interventions and preventions. Here's a bit of what he had to say on that.
Too often, those elected officials yelling the loudest about public safety concerns are also those voting to defund government budgets. Crime is a complex and multifaceted problem to tackle, and it's cynical and counterproductive to simply shout, "Lock them up," while providing fewer resources to the people and programs that prevent crime in the first place.
Senator DeWitt, are you supportive of the governor's violence prevention proposals?
Well, I think violence and crime across this state is much more significant than just simply throwing more money at the problem. People in this state want to know that if someone commits a crime, they're going to pay the price that society requires them to pay. It's much deeper than just throwing money at law enforcement, throwing money at social programs. There has got to be accountability, and there's got to be law enforcement that the laws in the state will be enforced appropriately. Too many criminals committing violent crimes are getting back out on the street. And to your point, no one on our side of the aisle supported the Criminal Reform Act that was passed in the middle of the night last spring that has prompted this significant increase in violence across our state, not just Chicago, not just Collier counties, all across this state. It's a complex issue. We have to include all aspects of fixing the problem, and it's not just throwing more money at it.
Senator Sims, are you confident the governor's violence prevention programs will get to the root of some of the problems?
Absolutely. I think that, and I just listening to my colleague just a moment ago, over the last 2 years, there's been nearly $10 billion invested into crime prevention and dealing with the root causes of crime. Nearly $10 billion. Now, in the governor's budget proposal this year, we're only nearly $750 million into dealing with those root causes of crime, not just investing in using prison construction and lock them up strategies as economic development, but preventing crime from ever happening in the first place. We've tried the failed policies of the past where we have been tough on crime, but we've not been smart with crime. We have not dealt with the root cause of crime, those issues where we're dealing with mental health, where individuals who struggle with mental health. We deal with individuals who are poor. We deal with housing insecurity and then education that will give individuals pathways to success. This budget does that. This budget puts us on that path, and it builds on the investments that we've made in previous years. Will we continue to do that work? Absolutely.
And as you said, Senator, of course, obviously, it's early in the process. I'm sure we'll be hearing more from all of you and your colleagues going forward. My thanks to Illinois House Majority Leader Greg Harris, State Senator L.G. Sims, State Representative Tom Demmer, and State Senator Don DeWitt for joining us. Grab a shovel. Chicagoans are digging themselves out from a blanket of snow. Some residents more than others. The south side was hit particularly hard, with some areas seeing more than 9 inches of snowfall. And more snow is being forecast for Thursday. Joining us now with more on what to expect is Illinois State climatologist Trent Ford, based at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. Trent, welcome back. First, what's it like in Champaign for you?
Probably about the same as it is, at least on the south side. It is very snowy right now. Honestly, the last time I went outside and measured, we had about 9 inches on the ground, and it's still coming down. And you know, after the second wave comes through tomorrow, I'm hoping we can push over that 1 foot mark. And so, as a snow lover, it's good times here.
Leave it to a climatologist to love the snow. So right. Yesterday we spoke with 2 of your colleagues about the challenges with forecasting this particular storm with such widespread, a pretty big difference from one region to the next about how much snowfall each part of the area would get. Has this storm done what we thought it would?
Pretty much, honestly, yeah. I mean, the snowfall patterns that we've seen so far, whether it be across the whole state of Illinois or just in the Chicagoland region, are pretty close to what was forecasted. Even just 3 or 4 days out. It's pretty incredible. It was just a good job of forecasting, and not only just forecasting, okay, here's what we think the general amounts are going to be, but the areas of uncertainty. And as the 2 guests mentioned last night, those areas of highest uncertainty are kind of along the bands where, we could see those really sharp gradients between, maybe 8 and 9 inches in one place and just a, 5-minute drive away could only get 2 or 3 inches. And so where those ended up was pretty well forecasted and again, communicated for folks to know the kind of the uncertainty.
What was it about this system that made this, these differing levels of snow possible?
Yeah, so it was really that play, that delicate tango maybe between the very warm, warmer or humid air coming up from the south, coming up from the Gulf of Mexico, and the cold, dry air coming down from the Canadian prairies. Where those 2 meet and how far that warm air can push up to the north really dictates where that line of heaviest snowfall is going to be. And because that boundary can be so thin, the gradient of snowfall along that boundary is really tight, kind of as I mentioned, going from 8 or 10 inches down to maybe 1 or 2 inches. But forecasting how far that warm air is going to push up or how far that cold air is going to push down is really, really hard for the models to capture. Even harder to communicate that for folks, wanting to know how much salt they need to put down, how much snow they should expect. But again, the combination of the really sophisticated models we have and the great forecasters and meteorologists we have around the area did a great job of forecasting the system.
So then Thursday, what can people expect and when is this going to let up?
Yeah, so it's sort of tapering off for the Chicagoland area. I was looking at the forecast just now, and it looks like there's anywhere between another 1.5 inches to maybe 3 inches for the broader Chicagoland area. Of course, again, a lot of that, when it does fall, the heavier totals are going to be on the south side of the area versus the north side. But it should the snowfall really should wrap up in earnest sometime around midday tomorrow, as on Thursday, and then we're just going to get cold, dry air in, so not much chance of it this weekend. And so for folks who are wondering when should I go out and finally scoop my sidewalk or my stoop, we should see that snowing tapering off tonight, and then by midday tomorrow probably be gone entirely.
So this, I mean, it's not just us in the Chicago and Illinois and obviously Northwest Indiana area as well. Talk about like just how wide-reaching the system is.
It's pretty incredible. We saw totals, widespread totals of anywhere between 6 to 10 inches all the way from kind of the Quincy down to the St. Louis Metro East area this morning. And it just, if you think about that I-55 corridor and just add, 100 miles on either side of it, that kind of east to southwest swath was really across the state. Really what we saw, the largest totals. We had totals widespread of 10 to 12 inches in the Peoria area, all along near Kankakee, Pontiac, Streeter, I think got nearly 10 inches. And then even in the further part of southeast, closer to southern Indiana, they got a good amount of snow as well. And now we're seeing the snow stretching all the way from right around here in Champaign all the way up into Ontario across the kind of the mainland of Michigan. So it was a really broad area of snowfall, even though, like I mentioned, the gradients were really tight along the edges. The kind of core area was pretty large. And I think one thing that spoke to how large of an area was affected by the heavy snowfall was if anybody got on those IDOT, the getting around Illinois maps, pretty much the whole northern 2/3 of the state was purple as far as the roads were concerned around noon today, showing that pretty much every major highway and interstate was affected in some way, north of I-64 today because of how much snow fell across the state.
And before we let you go, Trent, this seems sort of it's Groundhog's Day, similar to last year's weather in that, not a whole lot of snow at the beginning of winter, but then a lot in January and February. Is this going to be more common?
It's tough to say. The kind of patterns that we saw the last two winters, where it was very mild to start out and then really hammered us in February, were more of an effect of just kind of the year-to-year variability and the sort of patterns we see in the atmosphere that isn't sort of demonstrative of any kind of long-term trend. With that being said, we have seen temperatures in the wintertime warming in Illinois the last 50 to 100 years. And the first half of winter, kind of December and the first half of January, have warmed faster at a faster rate than the latter half of the winter. So that does affect the potential of snowfall. As we saw this last year, December was extremely warm. But overall, the last two winters being kind of a mild start and then really hammered us in at the end is more of just a factor of the conditions that are going on right there in the atmosphere. So again, not really indicative of any sort of long-term trend.
Okay, just plenty to shovel for all of us. Trent Ford in Champaign, thanks so much.
Hey, thanks. Always great to be here.
Up next, custom-crafted piñatas. Stay with us for a look.
I come from a people that not only found a way to survive through the most horrific circumstances, but they thrived.
I could not save one of the boys of color in my own life. If my family could be exposed to this horror, then really it could happen to anyone. We are truly all in this together.
There's much more ahead on the program, including our Spotlight Politics team and their take on the governor's budget proposal. But first, though piñatas are most closely associated with Mexican celebrations, the tradition has crossed cultures over the years. Now, the colorful, candy-filled characters are a must-have for every kid's birthday party. A Rogers Park woman left a corporate career behind to strike out on her own by offering custom piñatas. She's hoping her handmade creations will be a big hit as people return to gathering in person. Producer Erica Gunderson has the story.
We break them just so we can see what we're creating, and if they're breakable, and if they're too loose or they're too hard.
In the back of her Rogers Park shop, Reina Gonzalez spends hours carefully putting together the party essentials that were born to be broken.
Because you need to get that perfect, because it's for kids, if they can't break it, candy doesn't fall off.
Traditional piñatas aren't hard to find in Chicago, but if you're looking for a design that's a little off the beaten path, Gonzalez says she can craft just about anything in cardboard and crepe.
In the summer, we sell a lot of unicorn. Those are really popular. Batman, Spider-Man, these are traditional ones. I've done a duck. I've done Frida, for not to hit, but to display. I've done piñatas for festivals, so it's like 7 feet, 8 feet.
Like her creations, Gonzalez and her shop have taken a few hits. The former accountant left a 20-year career to strike out on her own in 2018.
I just got tired of the cubicle, the long hours in the desk, emails, the phone calls. So I told my husband, okay, well, there's always parties. There's always a celebration. I think this will be a good business to go into.
But just as the party was getting started,
in 2018, Christmas, it burned. So we were like 21 days in the store, and it just completely gone. We just had to kind of pick up where we left off.
Rebuilding took nearly 2 years, but Gonzalez hung in there. She used the time to teach herself the skill that wound up creating a niche for her store.
We had to start making the parts out of cardboard. So I would have, I'll make the legs, cut them out, make the, fold them, form it, the head, the stomach, make the pieces first and then build it together.
Though Gonzalez admits the timing of Dulceria La Fiesta's comeback could have been better,
we opened right in the middle of the pandemic.
She says social media has helped customers searching for just the right piñata find her.
We've gotten actually a lot of people from Wisconsin, Harvey, Indiana, Waukegan, just for their piñatas, because we can custom make, because it's, we can't find anywhere, my daughter really wants this.
And after a tough couple of years for gatherings, Gonzalez says she's hopeful that people are ready to party again in 2022.
The best feeling is when the kids get so excited when they see it, because they're like, I created that. It's not a party if you don't have a piñata.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Erica Gunderson.
It's not a party without a piñata. You can find more on Dulceria La Fiesta on our website. Still to come on Chicago Tonight, Jesse Sharkey says he won't seek another term as CTU president. A look at his work with the union and what's ahead. Helping Chicago's homeless population amid severe weather. What kinds of challenges are outreach workers facing?
The best thing that we can do in difficult times is look out for one another.
And our Spotlight Politics team examines the political perks of being governor in an election year, offering tax rebates and much more to voters. But first, some more of today's top stories. A messy day of travel. Hundreds of flights at Chicago airports were canceled today amid steady, heavy snowfall. O'Hare Airport says more than 660 flights were scrapped, with an average hour-long delay for arrivals and half an hour delay for departures. Midway reports 80 canceled flights, but minimal delays. Family members of Laquan McDonald and community leaders gathered to urge the Justice Department to file federal civil rights charges against Jason Van Dyke. The former Chicago police officer was sent to prison for McDonald's murder, but his early release this week for good behavior has prompted renewed calls for federal charges.
The moment that he was sentenced to 81 months in prison, we rang the alarms to the Department of Justice. We demanded that he be charged on a federal level. We demanded U.S. Attorney John Laws to intervene and step up. This is all documented information. This is not anything new.
Organizers are planning a rally tomorrow afternoon outside the Dirksen Federal Building. We'll have more from members of McDonald's family on tomorrow's program. Also this week, Senators Dick Durbin and Tammy Duckworth pressed the DOJ for an update on a federal investigation into McDonald's murder. In a letter to the Attorney General, they write, "The facts of this case remain shocking and upsetting. Van Dyke's state conviction and sentencing do not preempt or negate the interest of the federal government if the evidence supports charging Van Dyke with violating McDonald's civil rights." And be sure to join us tomorrow for a one-on-one interview with Senator Duckworth. The state's health department is gearing up to get children under 5 vaccinated against COVID-19. The move comes after Pfizer applied to the FDA yesterday, asking it to approve a 3-shot series for kids aged 6 months to 4 years. The state says it's working with medical and community leaders around the state to enroll vaccine providers, and that more than 2,200 providers who work with kids are currently signed up. After more than 3 years as president of the Chicago Teachers Union, Jesse Sharkey announces he won't seek re-election and will step down at the end of his current term.
I'll keep advancing the interests of the CTU. I'll do my best to maintain our public goodwill and our unity of our membership. But to repeat, I'm not going to seek another term.
WTTW News reporter Matt Masterson joins us now with more. So, Matt, why isn't Jesse seeking another term? And did he say whether he was going to continue to work with or within the union?
He said this is partly a personal decision just brought on by the toll of the job that is taken on him over the last couple of years since he's been president, and before that as vice president. There's been labor stoppages and a lot of tension with the mayor and the city. So all this stuff led to just a lot of tension over the years. And he maintained that the recent labor action that the union took just a few weeks ago that led to some school closures and the pandemic stress didn't necessarily lead into this decision, but it's obviously been a very difficult time to be sitting atop the union for these last few years. Now, for his future plans, he did say that he won't be involved in the CTU as an officer anymore, but he is planning to get back into the classroom as a teacher and continue his work there.
So Sharkey's been with the union for more than 2 decades. We know he served as vice president under Karen Lewis in 2010. Then he became president once she retired in 2018 and then got elected again after that. What are some of his accomplishments?
One of the main things he pointed to was the contract that the union won following its 2019 strike, the one that you mentioned earlier, lasted 2 weeks. That gave teachers in Chicago a raise. It put in place class size provisions and guaranteed by the end of this deal that there would be a nurse and a social worker in every school in the city. Under Sharkey's leadership, the union has also successfully expanded its bargaining rights at the state level and successfully lobbied for an elected school board, which is coming to Chicago in a few years. He and Karen Lewis have also just been credited with sort of reinvigorating the CTU membership during their respective tenures.
Now, CTU Vice President Stacey Davis Gates, she also spoke today after Sharkey's announcement. Here she is.
Karen gave us the infrastructure, the confidence, the boldness, the idea that these things could happen. Jesse helped to see those things through. He led us through that. And when we lost Karen, he held our hands and he reassured us that we were still going to get where we needed to get, and look at where we are.
So real quick, Matt, now that Sharkey's out of the running, what do we know about Davis Gates, about Stacey Davis Gates' prospects for the position and the opposition for that matter?
Well, we know that Davis Gates has Sharkey's endorsement. He called her the union's most effective spokesperson, and he said she's a capable leader. But this isn't his call to name his successor. It's going to be up to the union during an election later this spring. And while Stacey Davis Gates is likely going to be one of the strongest candidates for that role as the new president, there's going to be other challengers as well, namely from the Members First Coalition, a group that has already opposed Davis Gates and Jesse Sharkey, saying that they've been too concerned with being in front of the camera and not focusing enough on the union itself.
All right, we'll see what happens in May. Matt Masterson, thanks as always.
Thanks, Brandis.
As snowfall pelts the region, outreach workers in Chicago are working to provide supplies and shelter to the homeless community. Advocates are calling on the city for support as shelters deal with limited bed capacity in the midst of the COVID pandemic. Joining us now to discuss the housing situation during this snowstorm are Sam Guardino, a homeless outreach program director at Thresholds, an organization based in Ravenswood that works with homeless individuals, and Jose Munoz, executive director at La Casa Norte, an organization based in Humboldt Park that provides housing to homeless families. Thanks for both of you for joining us again. Sam, tell us how you and Thresholds, how are you all working to support people who are homeless right now, especially during this storm?
So we have outreach teams out every day trying to engage people who are homeless. Right now, obviously, we're very concerned about the folks who maybe isolate away from groups of homeless people. And so we are being especially vigilant about making sure people have basic things, hats, gloves, blankets, and just checking in on people, encouraging people to go inside when possible. And so we're doing what we usually do, but we're doing it more, as are other outreach partners throughout the city of Chicago.
Of course. Jose, what are you all hearing from people who are living on the streets, and how are they responding to your help?
Well, I mean, a lot of folks right now, especially with the cold, are, it's looking for a warm place to stay and, meals, and La Casa Norte is doing exactly that. So like many organizations, we've actually staffed up and are open 24 hours a day just to make sure that we have enough beds and access to food and shelter for individuals who are experiencing homelessness.
And Sam mentioned, of course, reaching out more to people who are more isolated and away, maybe who aren't relying on the community of other people who are homeless living outside as well. Jose, what are some of the concerns for those folks who might be isolated and preferring to be on their own?
Yeah, well, La Casa Norte focuses on working with youth. And so one of the things we're concerned with is that we have unaccompanied youth who are out there and may not be nowhere to seek services. So it's good to have folks out who are doing the outreach, as well as having staff at our facilities who specialize in working with youth and keeping them indoors and hoping that they don't try to go out there and brave the cold, because with the cold and the combination of the snow, it's not a safe place to be for young people or any person for that matter.
Right. Sam, of course, this pandemic has created challenges for homeless shelters in particular. What are some of the challenges that you're facing with regard to helping people?
Well, I think that the first thing to understand is that the folks that we're reaching out to who are living primarily homeless on the streets need services face to face, so that we've not been able to really avail ourselves of, say, phone call, Zoom. We're talking face to face services. So it's a matter of getting out there. At the beginning of the pandemic, we had to learn how to do this safely, thinking about the safety both of members or participants and staff. I think we've done that really well. Now we're in 2 years. I think we've got the idea of how to do this outreach safely down. Our staff, our wonderful staff, we're 90% boosted right now. And one of the challenges then is helping people now access vaccination and tests and things like that who aren't normally linked to the healthcare system. So that's a constant challenge that was just accentuated by COVID.
Jose, are you all facing similar worker shortages that a lot of industries are experiencing right now?
Yes, I think every organization like ours is, experiencing worker shortages. It was an issue that was an issue before the pandemic, and it's only gotten worse since the pandemic started. It's difficult to find individuals who have experience, especially in this work, to come in. Thankfully, right now, our shelter is fully staffed, and we have individuals who are there and, came out in the cold and, we couldn't do the work that we're doing without the dedicated team of staff and volunteers who are supporting the youth in our programs.
Sam, have you all, have your shelters or has your shelter been limited by the capacity that you're able to take in order to maintain social distancing within the shelter?
Well, the shelters in the city have been limited. Now, again, we're running an outreach program and not a shelter, but we face this every day. So shelter capacity has been limited because of the social distancing. The city has had various expansion shelter initiatives over the last 2 years, and that has made up part of the difference. But there still are not enough shelter beds in any day in Chicago for the number of people seeking shelter, and that's a common occurrence, despite the best efforts of everybody. And I really have to commend the shelter providers and the city in terms of really facing this problem head on to do sheltering safely in this COVID environment.
Yeah. And thank you for clarifying that. Jose, what about you all? And are you in about 30 seconds concerned that you'll be at capacity at La Casa Norte during the winter?
Yes, we're always the capacity is always a concern. Thankfully, right now we do have room in our shelters, and we are working closely with partners. So if someone is looking for shelter and they want to go to La Casa Norte, they can visit lacasanorte.org or dial 311 in the city of Chicago and get connected with someone there who can give them information about how to get to a shelter near them.
Okay. Thanks to you both for the work that you do, and best of luck. Stay safe and warm, Sam Guardino and Jose Munoz.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, our Spotlight Politics team digs into the governor's budget plan. Stay with us. Governor J.B. Pritzker presents an election year budget filled with tax relief and more spending on programs. And Rod Blagojevich weighs in on a congressional race in our Spotlight Politics. Here with all that and more are Amanda Vinicky and Heather Sharon. So let's first talk about the politics of Governor J.B. Pritzker's State of the State and budget address in this election year. Pritzker's plan includes nearly $1 billion in temporary tax relief. Take a look.
Right now, everyone is feeling the crunch of rising prices for goods and services. The higher cost of even basic necessities is making it harder to make ends meet. Whether it's supply chain interruptions or increasing oil prices, inflation is squeezing Illinois families. Government ought to do more to ease the pain and put more money in the pockets of hardworking Illinoisans.
Amanda, the obvious question first, is this budget purely political?
Well, Brandis, politics are involved in everything, even when it is coupled with deeply held beliefs. So I am not going to right now give any sort of, characterize what is the motivation behind this, but certainly, yes, there is nothing that the governor is going to be doing this year without an eye toward his reelection effort. And certainly this does appear in many ways to be at least tailor-made for that. You could say, however, that there are some fundamental reasons behind these choices. There's the inflation aspect, and also you talk to some members of the governor's team and they point out, hey, if you have one-time costs, that isn't being built into the budget because there's a recognition that while right now revenues are exceeding estimates, that is not going to continue into the future, nor, by the way, will Illinois get that federal stimulus money going forward. So there might be some reasons to do that, but sure, if you're a Republican, if you're a challenger, you're going to raise your eyes and say, hey, wait a second, that's taxpayer money, and by the way, where are some of the changes that could structurally allow this to happen? If you can afford a property tax break for 1 year, why not be able to do that forward? And by the way, politics is behind that. That is why Illinois for so many years has been unable to deal with that. Property taxes really being a very big albatross for many residents.
And Heather, it's not necessarily unprecedented, though, for governors to offer tax breaks or increase spending in an election year.
That's correct. This is the power of incumbency writ large. So I imagine we've already seen a lot of headlines. Pritzker offers $1 billion in tax relief. And that's the sort of headline that candidates any time of the day or year die for. And that's exactly what the governor was going for. Although Amanda's right, it doesn't necessarily make it, sort of untoward. If it's good politics and good policy, that's what we have to sort of now dig into as we get the nitty gritty of the budget proposal, because the devil is always in the detail. But it's not going to hurt J.B. Pritzker going into an election cycle to be able to point to this budget and say, look, I know times are tough. I'm trying to help you out. That's a potentially very powerful message on the campaign trail.
And Amanda, briefly before we move on, what happens next for this budget proposal, in a General Assembly that is majority Democrats? Is this going to be smooth sailing for the governor?
We got that signal from the Democratic leaders of the House and Senate that they're pretty darn pleased. Nonetheless, they left open that there's going to be room for negotiations. And we've heard some feedback, particularly from progressives, that they want more. If you have a surplus, there is most certainly a tendency to want to spend it, especially when legislators themselves are also running for re-election. Nonetheless, they've got a quick timeline because of that primary coming up in the summer. They're hoping to get out of the Capitol here by early April, which means, yes, I think the expectation is, by and large, that Democrats are going to push forward Pritzker's plan.
Now, Jason Van Dyke, switching gears here, was reportedly released to a halfway house in the killing of Laquan McDonald, although the state is saying that he is still in the custody of the Illinois Department of Corrections. Now, Senators Durbin and Duckworth both want the U.S. Attorney General to consider charging the former Chicago police officer federally. So, Heather, first explain, why federal charges would not be double jeopardy, because Van Dyke, we know, was already tried and convicted in state court in McDonald's death. What other federal charges could he face?
Well, he could potentially be charged with violating Laquan McDonald's civil rights or acting in against the Constitution under the color of authority. And that's what the senators want the Department of Justice to look at. Now, back when Jason Van Dyke was convicted back in, 3 years or so ago, everybody sort of breathed a sigh of relief, and the pressure on the federal government to act was reduced because he was going to prison. And I think people are now talking about this more because they're looking at sort of the relatively short time that Jason Van Dyke spent in prison because of a series of rulings the trial court judge made, and saying, hey, wait a minute, maybe we want to take another look out of this. So something very similar happened in Minneapolis in the trial of Derek Chauvin, the officer who murdered George Floyd. He was convicted in state court of murder, but he also faced federal charges. And the 3 other officers involved with George Floyd's death are now on trial facing federal charges. So this wouldn't potentially be unusual, although it would potentially sort of bring up everything that Laquan McDonald has meant to the city and sort of reopen those wounds. And we've, heard from his family that that's not something that they want to be taken lightly. And of course, there's a lot of pressure in an election year to make sure that everything that's being done to address Laquan McDonald's murder is being done.
Amanda, does this kind of pressure from, the chair of the Senate Judiciary, Dick Durbin, or the NAACP for that matter, does that matter to Attorney General Merrick Garland or U.S. Attorney John Lausch here in Chicago?
Again, this is going to get back to what we initially talked about. Of course it does. How can it not? That is immense pressure, and it's coming from some significant places. And already, by the way, while the Biden administration is contending with inflation, contending with a whole lot of other matters where there are fears that Democrats are going to lose control in Washington. And so, yes, this does feed into that. Nonetheless, there is, of course, an expectation, a belief that these decisions are made by prosecutors when you're looking at the judicial branch is far removed from that political pressure as possible. So it is going to be part of the conversation. Believe me, I wish I was privy to what was going on in there. It cannot be ignored, but I think either Garland or Lausch would say that is not the driver behind what we do and why.
Okay, so in the 6th Congressional District, Democratic Congressman Sean Casten is running against his colleague, Congresswoman Marie Newman, who is embroiled in an ongoing ethics investigation. And now in a twist, a political operative has paid former Governor Rod Blagojevich $500 to weigh in on Newman's ongoing ethics investigation. Take a look.
What she's accused of doing, while it might not smell good to some people, really is standard practice in politics and in government, and has been around for a long, long time.
Now that's a Cameo there, the website, for those of you who know it. Amanda, does anybody know who did this? Because $500 for a Cameo is significant.
Yeah, I will say I watched that Cameo went on for quite a bit, and when you evidently pay Rod Blagojevich for a Cameo appearance, you're going to perhaps get more than 30 seconds that some A-list celebrities would give you. This went on for quite some time. It was paid for by a political operative who, through reporting in the Washington Post, I believe, found that it was somebody connected to a political action committee that is working for Casten's election. So not to say that Casten himself was involved or this was an approved expense of his campaign, but a PAC that is working for him. So it may be one that sort of backfires because it could be seen as a distraction, giving money to Blagojevich, when really the heart of this ethics scandal that is hounding Marie Newman is somewhat serious in nature, in regarding that she is believed to have tried to fend off having another challenge by putting somebody on the payroll, ultimately, by the way, a payroll on her campaign, now working to get her reelected against Casten.
No, Heather, Casten has nearly $1.6 million on hand. Newman has about a third of that at $573,000. What will this race come down to? Is it going to be about fundraising, the ethics issue for her?
Well, it's interesting because this is an intra-party sort of race where the candidates agree on most of the issues. Kasten and Newman are progressive members of the House. Now, while Newman might be a little bit more progressive than Kasten on some issue, Kasten has been really outspoken on environmental issues and the need for energy sustainability. So there's not a whole lot of room policy-wise for them to differentiate themselves, which is why this sort of ethics cloud can really come into play. And it always helps to have plenty of money at your disposal. You can buy television ads and you can get out the vote and you can use social media. So, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how this all plays out, because of course Marie Newman was heralded as a giant slayer because she finally defeated Dan Lipinski, who had been in the 3rd district seat for so many years.
And of course, it doesn't hurt that there is a significant difference in the war chest as well there. We'll have to leave it there. Heather Sharon, Amanda Vinicky, thanks so much. And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that's our show for this Wednesday night. Please join us tomorrow night live at 7. After serving less than half of his prison sentence for the killing of Laquan McDonald, ex-police officer Jason Van Dyke is set to be released. Plus, reaction from McDonald's family. We visit Lawndale, where he grew up, for our In Your Neighborhood series. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and warm, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that supports free educational initiatives in the legal profession.